88.1 The Burg, your music central. Welcome everybody to What to Watch Weekends. My name is Nathan, the host of What to Watch Weekends. Tonight the show is just going to be a bit delayed. We'll see where things go, but we are going to have a really fun show tonight. We are going to be talking about the Evil Dead series, specifically The Evil Dead from 1981, Evil Dead 2 from 1987, Army of Darkness from 1992, and a couple other things that are sort of Evil Dead related. Tonight's show is going to be really fun. Thank you to those of you who listened in on Wednesday's show and realized, hey, he wasn't joking when he said that the show would be on Sunday night instead of Saturday night this week, because last night was the football game and they tend to broadcast the football game over the Burg. So I couldn't very well override that. But we're here tonight and we're going to jump into the show after we take some breaks for some music. I like to kind of just space things out tonight. So stick around for that. 88.1 The Burg, your music central. Welcome back to What to Watch Weekends, everybody. My name is Nathan, the host of What to Watch Weekends, and we will be jumping into the first movie that we will be reviewing tonight. That being The Evil Dead from 1981, the original that started it all, as they tend to say. More so the one that started the Evil Dead series, but hey, potato potato, it's always just the same term referred to the same thing, movies, which is what my show is about, movies, indeed. So, let's jump into the basic plot summary of the original Evil Dead. Evil Dead follows young adult Ash and his 4 friends as they go up to a cabin in the middle of the woods because they are young adults and they're very responsible because they just go to a random cabin in the middle of the woods without telling anybody else. It's very, very smart decision there, guys, at any rate. Within the cabin, they find a book called the Necronomicon Ex Mortis, otherwise known as the Book of the Dead, which is a very subtle hint to the fact that it summons demons when you read out of it. You know, it's called the Book of the Dead. It's a book about the dead, as in demons, more specifically demonic possession. I should probably stop being incredibly sarcastic right now, but it's too much fun, so I'm not going to stop being incredibly sarcastic about the whole thing, because it's kind of obvious where this is going. After they find a tape recorder next to the Necronomicon that translates and reads out passages from the Necronomicon, it ends up causing all 4 of Ash's friends to be demonically possessed. Again, we could kind of all see where this was coming from or where this was going, but at any rate, all 4 of Ash's friends end up becoming demonically possessed, and he must survive the nightmare, as it's called. And in order to kind of get you into the spirit of like what the basics of this movie is really about, the movie was originally supposed to be called The Book of the Dead before it was changed to Evil Dead, apparently because the producer thought that people in America, specifically kids in America, would not watch a movie with a book in the title. That's kind of a funny reason to change the name of the movie, but I mean, it was also the 80s, so very high chance of that being the case. At any rate, let me say right now that the basic premise follows Ash as he has to deal with the nightmare around him. Ash, the character, is not the only one surviving a nightmare, because everybody else involved in the movie was also surviving quite a bit of a nightmare. So, first thing I should really mention about The Evil Dead is it's quite a notorious sort of indie darling, a movie that was made for very little money and was kind of a miracle of existence rather than a miracle of being good. People kind of judged it on the fact that, well, it came out and it was made. That right there is just surprising and amazing to begin with. And it does earn that reputation quite well from being good from the very beginning. Like, honestly, if it was half as good as it was, even then it'd still be pretty miraculous. The fact that it turned out this good, it's like, wow, that's an achievement. That's definitely an achievement, and Sam Raimi would not have a career without it to this day. He wouldn't have made Spider-Man without Evil Dead, so it's a very important reason. It's a very important movie for that reason, more specifically. But, I mean, that doesn't mean that it was exactly a non-nightmare. If anything, that just kind of guarantees that for the cast and crew, it was a complete and utter nightmare. The first thing to really keep in mind is that the cabin in the woods that the movie is taking place in was kind of a lodging space for the actors and the crew while making the movie, as in like they would spend like multiple nights within this cabin, and in the cold in the middle of the woods. That probably wasn't fun. Understandably, they probably had to they definitely had arguments and bickering while just trying to huddle up in this very cold cabin. When I say cold, I'm only emphasizing that because another fact about this movie is that the camera apparently froze while making it. That's how cold it was. So it's important to mention it, because if your camera gets frozen, it's not exactly easy to do that. It's kind of a mechanical system. It's got interesting film stock in it, and I'm not talking about just the film stock. I'm talking about the whole camera. So it's got to be cold enough for that to happen. And it was cold enough for that to happen. So it must have been pretty cold. And us here in Ellensburg, we're used to it being cold. It should also be mentioned that the three main figures involved in the movie were all friends before making it, which, of course, it doesn't sound like the most wild thing, but, I mean, we're talking a matter of at least a couple years of friendship before going out into the middle of the woods and spending time making the movie. So, that's definitely a trademark of a lot of indie movies, just getting your friends involved in it in some capacity. Namely, the main figure involved in it was Sam Raimi, that being the director of the movie and also, I believe, the writer. We have Bruce Campbell, who was the actor who was playing Ash, who had been Sam Raimi's friend since high school. And then we have Robert G. Tappert, otherwise known as the producer. Both Bruce Campbell and Sam Raimi knew Robert from college, more specifically, after Robert met them through Sam Raimi's brother, Ivan. So, I mean, right there, you've got a trio of people who have known each other for a while and work on movies here and there, kind of throughout their educational careers, and then they decide to go out and make an actual movie together, something that could be seen and shown in theaters, theoretically. And that right there is just such a trademark of indie movies. You usually start with the people close to you and then kind of branch out from there. I know I've done that before. They also ended up enlisting the help of people within their home state of Michigan. In the trivia that I was reading, it didn't really specify the hometown specifically, but it was also kind of implying that they were more so looking around the state of Michigan to get help. And when I say help, I mean financial help. They, again, didn't have the highest budget to make the movie, so they were doing things like getting loans from the bank, which must have been real fun, and especially with the interest rates. They ended up having to borrow money from their friends and family, which, again, must have been really fun, not for the interest rates, but more so asking people that you were close to, hey, can I borrow money to spend on this crazy project idea that I have? I don't know if you'll get your money back. A lot of goodwill could probably be burnt in a thing like that, but I mean, what works, works. And they eventually did make the movie and eventually distribute it. So, I mean, again, miracle. It's also important to note with the money that they ended up having to probably do this more than once. We're not talking about one-time big gathering where they were smart about the finances and had it all set up at one point. I think they did do that originally. That was the original intent. But about halfway through filming, they ran out of money and had to go back and okay, wow. I misread my notes because it's a bit late at night and I'm just a little bit tired. Oopsie daisy. Let me backtrack here for a quick second. They definitely did run out of money multiple times while filming, but they didn't exactly run out of money halfway through. That's not the thing that I wanted to confirm more specifically. What I wanted to confirm happened halfway through filming was that pretty much every single actor, all the actors playing Ash's friends, the four other people, ended up leaving halfway through filming. More specifically, Bruce Campbell was the only one who was sticking by in this cabin in the woods with Sam Raimi and the other members of the crew in order to be there. And if I had to guess, that's kind of the reason that Ash is the main character of the story, or more so the only one who ends up surviving, because Bruce Campbell was willing to stay in the middle of the woods and subject himself to the elements and being injured on this very unprofessional and not well stunt trained set, where a lot of the stunts were done by them because they kind of had to be, because they had no money for stunt actors. It's just like, that's the way I work through it in my head of like, okay, this is probably why Ash ends up being the main character for years to come, because Bruce Campbell's just willing to stick around and he's willing to subject himself to it. And the movie wasn't originally written, or didn't feel like it was originally written, for Ash to be the main character. Just an interesting theory I have about it. I don't know if that's exactly the main reason for it, but I mean, hey, it's worth thinking about. Another thing that's just worth thinking about is that I'm giving a very brief overview of the amount of trivia that exists about Evil Dead. There is so much out there. There is long pages of it, and with all of that to read through, it's a miracle that the movie even happened in the first place, with all the complications that it really went through. If anything, I could spend the entire time talking just about the trivia, and I really don't want to. I want to focus at least a little bit on the technical aspects and more so the artistry of the original Evil Dead, because I think it does exist there if you kind of look past all of the technical stuff and all of the production sort of pitfalls, or more so deterrents, just the overall legacy of it being an independent movie and there being so much trivia surrounding that. It kind of feels nicer to take a step back and go, okay, let's take a look at all of the basics of what the movie's actually trying to do and how well it does those things. One of the biggest things that I wanted to point out about the original Evil Dead that was then later carried on into the other Evil Dead movies is the way the camera moves. To my memory specifically, and this was carried on into Evil Dead 2 as well, and Army of Darkness, and all the other subsequent projects that we'll be talking about tonight. The way the camera moves is honestly one of the best features of it, because they did this thing where they basically gave the camera agency. Imagine, if you will, the ability for a camera to kind of swoop from side to side, almost like you're watching a drone that has the ability to control itself mid-air and tilt from side to side with ease beyond the realm of physics, right? And it crashes into things, it crashes through windows, it opens up doors while moving, and it makes this horrible groaning noise. If anything, you are looking directly through the eyes of a monster. That's the entire intent behind it. That was just done by mounting the camera on a 2x4 piece of wood and just holding it and moving it around like that. For that reason, it's such a... I think it kind of just shows with effects and with camera movement specifically, simplicity is best. The way it works is it just kind of, you really just follow it as it's just kind of getting into every nook and cranny, just kind of moving around and soaring throughout the forest and crashing into the windows of this cabin in the middle of the woods. It's just like, it's such a fun effect that feels so simple to do, and yet incredibly difficult to get right. I feel like this movie, they tried so hard to get it right, and they managed to nail it pretty much every single time. I remember it being the first thing you basically see. The way it starts off in this sort of swampy area, and then it soars over the water. I was constantly wondering to myself, how did they end up doing that? It's ridiculous. It's also just such a... It's just... Oh boy, sorry, I just got a minor amount of distracted. I think my watch just went off. Beep, beep. Anyways, I remember that being one of my favorite aspects of the original Evil Dead. I also remember the way the camera looked. More specifically, how the film actually looks. And when I say that, I mean the film grain. the way it was filmed was quite obviously on slightly cheaper film stock because, again, they didn't have the highest budget to do the most amazing things and buy the best film stock. So they kind of had to cut corners somewhere, and so they ended up going with cheaper film stock. It makes sense. And yet, for something like that, it ends up doing it more favors than more than like destroying the feel of the movie, because it looks like it has an actual texture to it. A lot of movies these days, with their clean looks and just like color grades and the way they tend to look in like professional, shot on like high power digital cameras, I think modern media looks good, but you really can't beat the classic look of a film grain movie, of a movie with film grain in it specifically. I mean, obviously I could go on a rant about how Christopher Nolan did it with Oppenheimer in 2023, but I think it's more important to notice it in the times that it was more relevant and used more often, like Evil Dead. It looks so good even in comparison to some other movies from the 80s because of its lower quality, because of the way of how rough it looks. It kind of enhances the overall feel of it because, again, it's about demonic possession. It's about being in the middle of nowhere. It's about being trapped and being in a horrible situation. And for something like that to really sink in, I think if it looks really rough, you can kind of transport yourself into the mind of the characters experiencing this problem, because it's probably like the best way to describe it is a rocky road of problems constantly crossing your mind. Ash is like now having to deal with 4 of his friends being possessed by demons. His brain is probably racing 24/7. It's probably in this state of survival constantly. And this is all over the course of like one night. He's not having a good time with this rough texture. It's hard to perfectly describe, but you feel like you're Ash. You feel like the way it's so chunky and rough and just scratchy kind of mixes up your perception of the movie as you're watching it. And because of that, you kind of get the same experience that Ash would get looking through his own eyes at the things in front of him, because it'd feel very chunky or distorted or moving around constantly or just not knowing how to feel about any of it, feeling very attacked or just kind of like something is breaking down around you. It's so difficult to perfectly explain, but I can definitely guarantee that the way it looks gets the point across better than I could possibly put into words. But there's no harm in trying, and I've definitely tried my best to explain it. With that, I should also want to explain something about this movie that I think I should mention before recommending it. This movie is very violent. It's very, very gory. It's very brutal. A lot of it comes down to, again, the way it looks, but I can definitely put this into words. The gritty nature of the film grain definitely makes the blood look a lot worse than it already would have. Keep in mind that the blood already looks pretty bad because it's an independent thing. They don't have the highest budget. And they basically went with, okay, how do we make it look thick and extremely dark red? Like very dark red. Okay, we're going to put in like way too much red food coloring and even just a little bit of blue. And that doesn't end up making it purple blood. It makes it like, if anything, twinge on the way of like a darker brown or just like a dark brick red. Imagine that coming out when somebody's like stabbing a zombie, right? It makes me uncomfortable looking at it. And I could definitely tell you that the grain makes it look even more murky and undiluted and just runny and thick. It adds something to the experience that is unmistakably dark, gritty, and very, very real feeling. Even though it could almost be seen as cartoony, it's more of a gut punch the way it's done. For that reason, it feels more violent than it is, and it's already really violent. Quite violent, in fact. And for that reason, I definitely have to give a warning of saying like, hey, if you're not okay with violence, which is fine, maybe don't watch the original Evil Dead. Even in comparison to the other two, this one's pretty up there in terms of brutality. So for that reason, I think the original Evil Dead is definitely worth watching, but it's not for the faint of heart, and it's got some rough edges here and there, not even just in the grain. It does kind of lose steam during those last 10 minutes, where again, if it was filmed in sequence, which from the way I've kind of gathered it was, and by sequence I mean as in they started at the beginning of filming, beginning of the script when they started filming, and the end of the script is the last kind of scenes that they were filming. From the way I gathered it, the last half is just when basically the rest of the cast left, and they only had Bruce Campbell to play Ash for the rest of the movie. So they basically had to deal with Bruce Campbell being the only one on screen, right? And they had to work around that. And so Sam Raimi was like, what if we do like a stop motion decomposing body, right? And by that point in the movie, I'd already seen a bunch of brutality after he's basically forced to kill all of his friends. I wasn't necessarily in the mood to watch a very elaborate stop motion dissolving body. It felt like too much at that point, because keep in mind, every time he killed a friend, it was extremely brutal. Very, very brutal. So it kind of felt like too much at the very end. For that reason, I think it just loses a bit of the charm that it had going for most of it. But I can still recommend it for its virtues of just, again, existing as an independent movie and being something that has released to a wider audience. I think, again, it's not perfect, but it's worth a watch if you're able to stomach it, at least in my opinion. So that's my opinion on the original Evil Dead. We are going to take a quick break for some more music, some ad breaks, and when we get back, we will jump into Evil Dead 2. 88.1 The Burg, your music central. Welcome back to What to Watch Weekends, everybody. My name is Nathan, the host of What to Watch Weekends, and we will be jumping into the second review of the night, that being Evil Dead 2 from 1987. No, it is not called The Evil Dead 2, it's just called Evil Dead 2. It's kind of crazy that they did that. It's just removing one singular word, and only people who are pedantic would notice it. So I noticed it quite heavily while watching the movie. So Evil Dead 2. Let's start with the basic plot summary of the movie, okay? After traveling to a cabin in the woods with his girlfriend, Ash, a young adult, ends up finding a book called the Necronomicon Ex Mortis. After they find a tape recorder next to the book that recites out the passages of the Necronomicon Ex Mortis, his girlfriend ends up becoming possessed by demons. And he must survive the nightmare of his girlfriend being possessed. Okay, this is just the first movie again, isn't it? No, it's different, because this time there's only one other person with Ash. It's just 2 people instead of a total of about 5. See, it's completely different if you change the number. But it's not completely different, because they're still going to a cabin in the woods, they're still finding the Necronomicon, and they're still finding a tape recorder that plays out a translation of the Necronomicon, and there's still demonic possession. What's new? Well, after 7 minutes, Ash ends up being attacked by that sentient camera that we talked about in the first movie. It's still being mounted on a 2x4, I think. Don't fact check me on that. And it basically just attacks him and sends him flying into the air, and then Ash ends up becoming possessed by a demon. And then the daughter of the guy who's on the tape recorder, who was transcribing the passages of the Necronomicon, ends up awakening the demon that possesses his girlfriend. So the daughter of that guy, right? She ends up getting into town and meets up with her boyfriend, and they go out into the woods, and then they find a couple hillbillies, and those 4 end up going to the cabin, so it's just Ash with 4 other new people now. Well, what's different about this one? See, here's let me explain, right? It's not the same movie. It's not the same movie. It legitimately is not the same movie. I'm really just joking around because it does sound pretty similar if you take all things considered. But all things considered, it's also just not exactly a remake. It's definitely not just the first movie with it going in a completely different direction. Here's my explanation for it. After watching an interview with Bruce Campbell himself directly, and again, Bruce Campbell is the one who plays Ash. He's a friend of Sam Raimi. They've been friends since high school, apparently. And here's how he describes it. He basically says that the first seven movies of the minute, yes, the first 7 minutes of the movie Evil Dead 2 are really just a recap of the original Evil Dead, right? So if you take the first 7 minutes of Ash going with his girlfriend up to the cabin and them finding the Necronomicon and her getting demonically possessed and him basically burying her and then him being tackled by the demonic entity and being possessed, right? So you take up to the 7-minute mark right before he gets attacked by the demonic entity, and you cut that from Evil Dead 2, right? And you stitch it to the end of the original The Evil Dead, okay? You're actually going to get a pretty coherent experience because essentially at the end of the original Evil Dead, Ash ends up being attacked by the sentient camera again. Like, it's done as sort of a cliffhanger, sort of, oh, he still dies even though he's the only one who survived this entire time, right? So they have the camera zoom in and have it go into his mouth and all that stuff. But then you cut it there and you stitch it with the end of that 7 minutes going from the 7-minute mark of Evil Dead 2, where he ends up being attacked by the demonic entity and flown through the air and ends up landing in some water and he's all possessed now. And it's like, oh, here he is actually being possessed for once. You take that and you're like, oh, so basically Ash has never left the woods. The end of the original Evil Dead, here's just the follow-up to that pretty directly, right? It seems kind of crazy to think about, but the reason they did that, and they had to do it that way, was because they did not own the rights to the original Evil Dead. They, at this point in time when they were making Evil Dead 2, they didn't own the, I just got a text request asking about an interview with, about the interview with Bruce Campbell. I did not interview him. This is just an interview that I watched. I should have clarified that. I did not interview him directly. Are you kidding? I could not interview Bruce Campbell. I wish I could, but I'm only a college student. There's no way I interviewed him. At any rate, it's just interesting to think about how that is, they basically didn't own the rights to the original Evil Dead, so they kind of had to work around it in that way. And it's just like, that to me seems like kind of an annoyance, but I also kind of get it, because the original movie was an independent movie and they had to kind of recoup their losses somehow, or more so get somebody to distribute it through the proper channels. So like without them, they probably had to sell away the rights for that reason, and it made sense when it came time to make a second movie that they couldn't necessarily, they didn't own the rights for them to use the footage from the original movie in the second movie. So they basically had to recreate it without it being directly tied. It makes sense if you kind of unpack it a bit. What that does mean is that later down the line, I kind of start to question with other entries in the series, like, okay, what's the actual continuity? Which one actually happened? Is it both with his friends, with like his 4 other friends, or is it just with his girlfriend? Is that the original thing? Or are we going to go with like one or the other, or is it both, kind of? But like, even then, I don't really care, because it's more fun for the timeline to be completely broken to bits than for it to make any sense. Because then when stuff stops making sense, you can kind of just poke fun at it and you still have fun watching the movie and you still have entertainment value there. And so for that reason, I don't really harp on it too much. I more so just want to unpack and kind of mention that as trivia, because it's something I found out while doing research. I should also mention that it is interesting to kind of harp on, with Ash being demonically possessed after the 7-minute mark in Evil Dead 2, he ends up being possessed, and that does cause issues down the line. It's crazy how he has enough plot armor to survive for that long. He ends up being like pretty much the only one who's gotten possessed in the movies, at least, and not like been killed off. He very nearly does, but it's kind of implied after he gets possessed. It then turns to daytime like very quickly and extremely conveniently, and then he turns back to normal. Then later on in the movie, when it shifts to nighttime, he then randomly turns back into the evil version, and it's kind of like, okay, what is the rules here? What are the rules here? I think it was kind of trying to imply that Ash has a strong enough will for him to be like, oh, able to subvert being turned permanently evil like everybody else. And he can kind of just switch back and forth whenever he wants. But, I mean, that's not a perfect excuse. At the same time, it's fine that it worked out that way. It's kind of like, okay, you are trying to make him the main character, so you've got to have him do something to kind of subvert him being killed off at some point, because every other person who's gotten possessed has been killed off. So fair play, I guess. Maybe, sort of, kind of, not really. But I mean, I'll let it slide just this once. I sound like a person from the 30s like this. Just this once, Commander. I'll let this one slide. At any rate, it is also worth noting that his hand ends up becoming possessed, and that's really funny. His hand does stay permanently possessed, and then he saws it off with a chainsaw, right? And like that does kind of make sense. Like, okay, part of you is still possessed permanently. You gotta lose something here if you're gonna be able to switch back and forth. So, okay, my allowances are now taken back because you've now given me a reason for him to kind of switch between both of them, because now he's lost something permanently to be able to switch back and forth. After he loses his hand, after sawing it off with a literal chainsaw, they then make a mechanism. This is with him and the daughter of the guy who was translating the book. They then make a chainsaw hand for him. And it's the coolest thing ever. I've never wanted to see someone with a chainsaw hand until I watched this movie, and I was like, that's awesome. That's such a good idea. Why haven't more people copied this? I know Chainsaw Man exists. That doesn't count. Don't bring that up. It is also crazy to me how they managed to make him sawing his own hand off really funny. But it's Bruce Campbell. The way he looks while doing it, I couldn't help but kind of laugh from the way his face looked while screaming doing it. It just felt comedic in essence more so. It kind of just speaks more so to the fact that with Ash being able to switch back and forth, it kind of highlights the fact that they're trying to make him more important in this movie. He was important in the first one, don't get me wrong. But it seems like they're more proactively trying to make him the main character and focus on that for the duration of the movie. Whereas in the first one, again, my theory was that they kind of just had him be the main character because Bruce Campbell was willing to show up and still be in this cabin in the woods for an extended period of time and be injured and all that other stuff for the second half of the filming. So they kind of just went with it. Whereas this one, they're like, okay, let's actively try to make a main character here because we need a main character for this story to actually be a story. And it works. It does end up working. I think it just kind of highlights it that now they're actually trying. They're going to do some interesting stuff with it. Again, having him switch back and forth, it feels very intentional that he wasn't killed off for that reason. And I think part of that was also just because they had him only go up with his girlfriend. As much as it fractures the timeline, just having the two of them be there originally, it makes it kind of feel like he's supposed to lose something pretty close just to start off with, and then kind of learn from that as it progresses. And then with the other characters showing up kind of as an afterthought rather than being there from the beginning, it makes their kind of introduction to the story seem less important, but also kind of matter in a way. Because, again, the girl who shows up is like the daughter of the guy who was living at the cabin beforehand. I should have mentioned that, actually. The guy who translates the book lives at the cabin that Ash is in. and then he ends up dying and turning into the demonically possessed things because he ends up having to kill his wife because she gets turned into a demon, and then he ends up dying in the process of that. So basically, the daughter ends up showing up in order to give him more pages of the Necronomicon. They just find Ash there, and with the hillbillies, one of them is the really annoying character in every horror movie who's just like, we should go outside and not stay inside, because he doesn't realize that there's like a literal sentient camera demon outside. Not as in like the demon looks like a camera, more so camera representing the sentient demon. You get what I'm saying. It's just interesting for that reason that they decided to go with the route of making Ash the main character, and they actively tried and made it work for that to happen. I appreciate the effort that they put into making it work in that fashion, because a lot of movies, because any series that tried to do that and not have a main character from the start and then introduced it after the fact, it would feel like a complete whiplash. Somehow Evil Dead manages to pull that off and have it not feel uncalled for. And like we're going to see in the next movie, after we take a quick break, which will be Army of Darkness, they tend to pull a lot more stuff in order for it to, and it still doesn't, in order to, and it still doesn't. Wow, that's a really well-connected sentence. Point is, in Army of Darkness, they end up pulling a lot more stuff that would feel like whiplash in any other series. So stick around after the break, where we'll jump into Army of Darkness. And enjoy this. 88.1 The Burg, your music central. Welcome back to the second hour, or the more so second half hour, of What to Watch Weekends. My name is Nathan, host of What to Watch Weekends, and we are going to jump into the third movie of our night, which would be Army of Darkness from 1992. This is the sequel, as it may be, to Evil Dead 2, and the follow-up to Evil Dead 1, in terms of it being the third movie in the series, not directly sequelizing Evil Dead. That was a very coherent series. That was a very coherent sentence. Yes, coherent sentence. At any rate, let us jump into the basic plot summary of Army of Darkness from 1992. After the events of the second movie, at the end of Evil Dead 2, which I will not tell you because it's more funnier to say, Ash ends up in the Middle Ages. Now you're really wondering what happened at the end of Evil Dead 2, aren't you? Too bad, I'm not going to tell you. So, back in the Middle Ages, Ash must fight the Deadites, that being the demonic entities that are basically possessing people, mostly his friends, and reclaim the Necronomicon. So, I guess I should give some context. With the end of Evil Dead 2, they ended up summoning a portal after summoning the ultimate bad, that being the Kandarian demon. They basically have to summon the ultimate evil and then summon a portal to send him back and basically destroy him once and for all. Unfortunately, Ash ends up getting sucked into the portal as well, and he ends up getting sent back to the Middle Ages with the Kandarian demon. Right? So you're following me? Okay, cool. So now he's in the Middle Ages, right? And now he has to deal with being in the Middle Ages. As in, like, he's in a literal castle. And you know what he does to deal with that? He turns into a complete and utter moron. I don't think they're actually exactly related, as in, like, he intentionally chooses to be a total moron. It's just kind of how he copes with the situation. I think his brain just kind of gives out on him as soon as he's sent to a completely different world. And believe me, I haven't been sent to a completely different world, but I can relate to having your brain give out on you when you're having to deal with a new situation. Believe me, I get it. So his brain gives up. And so that means he's now extremely confident in all of his abilities and is very talk-downy to everybody and very cocky. But it also means that he gets beat up a lot because he's a moron. And that means that every time he's a complete and utter, full of himself, arrogant nonce, I love that word. He ends up getting the snot beat out of him in order to compensate for him being a complete and total arrogant nonce. It's really entertaining for that reason. It's no fun to watch anybody who's extremely up about themselves and never get payback for it. If they get payback for it constantly, it suddenly becomes extremely funny, and you don't care that they're arrogant anymore because it's fun to watch them get beat up. It's cathartic. It's extremely cathartic is what it is. And even though he is extremely arrogant, I also will say that, like, if it wasn't Bruce Campbell, who just exudes a natural amount of charisma and humor and just ability to be incredibly fun to watch, I think it actually still wouldn't work with him being extremely arrogant and still getting his constant comeuppance. It's the combination of factors with it being Bruce Campbell for it to actually work. That's kind of the important ingredient in all of this. It has been from the very beginning, is Bruce Campbell just being in the movie and playing Ash for so long. Without him being there, what's the point? There is no point. That's the whole secret to Evil Dead. The whole reason I like these movies is because of Ash and because of Bruce Campbell. And I mean, there are other reasons to like it. I really like the fact that it's not a standard zombie series. It doesn't follow just like people dealing with it in their normal lives and having it be interrupted. No. It's not a boots on the ground thing. It's just like, okay, here's two movies set in the middle in a cabin in the middle of the woods, and now we're going to go back to the Middle Ages. And they're not actually zombies. They're demonically possessed by a crazy book that we have. And you can't exactly read it because you need to be smart and know how to read in this dead demonic language in order to actually summon the demons, right? And the main character of this series is such a moron that he can't actually read the book to summon the demons. Do you see why that's funny to me? The pure contrast and the balance of the elements is what makes it cathartic and funny to watch from the very beginning. I love The Evil Dead for that reason. And when I say The Evil Dead, I don't mean the original movie. I just mean the entire series as a whole, at least the original trilogy, which we'll get into in just a minute. But I think that, to me, is just what makes the series work and what made it a new favorite of mine. But I mean, individual jokes are also really fun. We've got the fact that as soon as Ash arrives in random medieval times, he ends up, he has this double-barreled shotgun with him, right? So he basically starts talking about the place he used to work called S-Mart, which is just Smart, the supermarket, right? And so he's basically standing there going, shop smart, shop S-Mart. Imagine if you're in the Middle Ages, if you're a squire, a noble squire in the Middle Ages, some random guy falls from the sky, and he looks beat up to all get out, and he has this weird thing with wood and two metal poles on it. He's got a chainsaw arm, right? And you don't even know what a chainsaw is. You just see this magical, weird metal spinning device, and then he's got in his other hand this weird wooden stock with two tubes coming off of it, and he recites the marketing campaign for Walmart. Can you imagine how much of a brain teaser that would be? I can't say anything more kind of, I guess, charged than that term, than brain teaser, because we are on the radio, but it still works. Can you imagine how much your brain would turn into liquid goop after hearing that? You'd be like, what? Because you're just in the Middle Ages as a squire, and some guy who you're like very surprised to see in the first place. He does not belong there, and he fell from the sky. And then he recites something like the Walmart slogan. That would be like the crowning jewel on the confusing sandwich. It's such a perfect scenario for a comedy movie. It's perfect. It's built directly into the thing. That's what's beautiful about it. And keep in mind that basically every other scenario after this point is pretty much exactly that. It's a perfect scenario for there to be something funny there. You've got, for example, Ash fighting mini versions of himself. Just these tiny little ashes that pop out. And I think I just realized why they did that, because there's multiple versions of Ash, and there's just like, it's called mini ashes now. And ashes are small. Did I just get the joke? I think I just got the joke. Oopsie daisy. At any rate, he's finding mini versions of himself, and then he ends up growing another head. Don't question it. And then the second head ends up growing like multiple legs, and then he ends up growing a new version of himself that splits off from him, and now he has there's two Ashes. I've gotten the joke again. We've got regular Ash, and then we've got evil Ash. And evil Ash is evil, and he's like, I'm evil Ash. He straight up says that he's evil Ash. I'm not making this up. Keep in mind that I'm laughing the entire time this is happening in the movie. And up to this point, the entire series has been this very, very deliberate mix of horror movie, or, in the case of Evil Dead 2, a very good horror movie with a lot of slapstick when Ash is fighting all the monsters. It's partly a comedy, but it's also mostly a horror movie. So keep in mind, while I'm watching Army of Darkness, I'm thinking to myself, what is this whiplash that I'm feeling? Because nothing about this is scary. All of this is extremely funny. I did not question it as much as I think I should have. But that's fine. I don't need to question everything. I can just sit back and have fun. Let me sit back and have fun. And thank you, Army of Darkness, for letting me do exactly that. Sit back and have fun as I watch Ash bury evil Ash alive, right? This is funny. Keep in mind, this is supposed to be funny. He goes off, and he has to go find the Necronomicon. And before he picks up the Necronomicon, he needs to say this special phrase that these wise men tell him to say. And he forgets the phrase, even though they tell him, don't forget the phrase. And he goes, yeah, I'll remember it. And then he goes, oh, what was it again? Oh, I forgot. And then he comes back with the Necronomicon and he goes, yeah, I said it, basically. Not every word perfectly, but I basically said it. It's the same thing. It's fine. He's such a moron, and he's such a screw-up that any other character I'd be infuriated by. With it being Bruce Campbell, I don't care. I enjoy the ever-loving life out of Army of Darkness for exactly this reason. He messes up, he's super confident, and more so switched around. He's super confident, then he messes up, then he's super confident again, then he messes up, then he sheepishly admits his mistake, but then he's super confident again. It's just a repeating cycle of that, and it's extremely funny for that reason. And it's also funny because the movies started off as a series of good horror thriller movies. And now it's just down to this massive comedic sandbox of sorts. That's what I really like about Army of Darkness. You know, when I really think about it, when watching Army of Darkness, I was realizing to myself, whenever I try to watch a movie for the first time, or when I watch a movie for the first time, I tend to look at it through two perspectives. I look at it through my own opinion, and I look at it through the sort of objective, sort of critic eye of a movie. It sounds extremely pretentious, because it sounds extremely pretentious, but at any rate, it's what I try to do because I review movies. And it's not a perfect system. It doesn't always work. But there's at least an attempt on my end to do that. And I can say with confidence that very few movies fall into the category that Army of Darkness does, where I can say that from a critical aspect, it's not exactly the best movie. It does have a lot of good jokes, but it's like, why did you change up the formula so much? You could have had some horror aspects to it. That's my critical side. And I tell it to shut up very, very strongly, because my personal opinion side is having way too much fun watching the movie to care what the critic has to say. There are very few movies that fall into that perfect sweet spot for me. And I'm very glad that Army of Darkness is one of them. And with that being said, we are going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we will jump into something that I think falls into the same category that is also from the Evil Dead series. It's the kind of and more add-on to the show that I've been kind of hyping up of like Evil Dead, the original Evil Dead movies, and then and more. So we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll jump into the and more segment. It's kind of a surprise. 88.1 The Burg, your music central. Welcome back to What to Watch Weekends. And for the last thing that we will be talking about tonight, that being the last item on the watch list for the way I tend to structure What to Watch Wednesdays. But the last thing that we will be talking about tonight from the Evil Dead series comes from Ash versus the Evil Dead from 2015. So, this is not a movie. I should kind of clarify that now, but it's What to Watch. It's not there's nothing in the title of this show that is movie specific. So it totally counts to talk a bit about a TV show. Basically, back in 2015, they came out with an Evil Dead TV show that is set as a direct sequel to Army of Darkness, set 30 years after the fact, which is following Bruce Campbell still playing Ash a while later after the fact, keep in mind. And he's basically still playing Ash, it's 30 years after Army of Darkness. He's now lounging around, being a complete lazy hermit, doing nothing with his life, working at basically a Best Buy if it looked more like a Fred Meyer, but then squashed into the size of like a Dollar Tree. Yeah, just imagine that in your head, right? And then he ends up inadvertently causing the forces of evil to rise again through, again, the Necronomicon, and must now team up with his co-workers Pablo and Kelly to save humanity. So I suppose there should definitely be some context here first. I've only seen the first 4 episodes of the show, but I feel confident enough in my abilities as a critic and just as the ability to say, hey, I watched the first 4 episodes, here's some things that I noticed from it here and there. We haven't got too much time left in the show, so it might as well be like just kind of a quick thing to mention and talk about here and there. I've got a couple points about it. I've just seen the first 4 episodes. But I definitely will say, just to get it out of the way, that I would watch the rest of it if I had the time, and I definitely want to watch more of it. So that should be a pretty glowing review. I should also mention that I could have very well watched other movies in the Evil Dead series. It doesn't necessarily cut off with Army of Darkness. It's not like between this show and Army of Darkness, there was nothing between those two things that was Evil Dead related. More specifically, in 2013, they made a remake of the original Evil Dead, and it was called Evil Dead. So in Evil Dead, the 2013 remake, I didn't do too much research on it, but essentially they replaced the main character they replaced Bruce Campbell with this girl who's still called Ash, I believe. I can check really quick. But basically, it's about Ash now being someone who... Oh, no. Her name is Mia. So they don't even have a character named Ash in the movie. They don't even change Ash to a girl. It's just a completely new character named Mia, right? So now she's in Evil Dead, and she and her family go to this cabin in the woods and find a Necronomicon, blah, 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 blah. Same dealy dang dealio. But I didn't want to watch it because it doesn't have Ash or Bruce Campbell in it. And even then, after Evil Dead from 2013, they then had Evil Dead Rise that came out in 2023, right? Now, first off, that is way too long for a sequel. I don't even, that's a long time. 10 years. I know that there was a long time between Army of Darkness and the original Evil Dead, which was about 10 years. But even then, yeesh. For it being a Hollywood thing, unsurprising. I didn't want to watch it if it didn't have Ash in it, if it didn't have Bruce Campbell returning. So I didn't. I didn't subject myself to that injustice of movies. I just wanted to watch the TV show. And for that reason, I did. because it has Bruce Campbell and it has Sam Raimi direct the first episode. So right there, it's got my interest peaked in comparison to a remake by Hollywood that's about some random character that I haven't grown accustomed to and didn't have any attachment to. On the one hand, I could have totally watched them. On the other hand, who can blame me for not? So, I should definitely say that the whole reason I kind of harped on Evil Dead 2 sort of fracturing the timeline and Army of Darkness also kind of fracturing the timeline even more, or some more so not acknowledging it, is that in the show, with something like this, 30 years after Army of Darkness, it's kind of within the first episode that Ash basically has to go, okay, I went to this cabin in the woods with my 4 friends, and my girlfriend also got possessed. And it shows clips from both the original Evil Dead and from Evil Dead 2, and I was like, okay, are we doing both now? Is that what we're doing? I'm fine with that, but we're doing both now. Okay. At some point, I'm going to give up. And I gave up pretty much immediately after that scene happened of figuring out the timeline. I've read somewhere else that later down the line, with the discrepancy between the first Evil Dead and Evil Dead 2 is that they find the Necronomicon in the basement in the original Evil Dead, and they find it just upstairs on a table in Evil Dead 2. Apparently, at some point in the show, Ash is like, oh, I found it either in the basement or on this table in the cabin. And it's like, okay, you guys don't even know which timeline we're going with officially. That's fine. If you're going to just have fun with it, that's completely fine. I don't care anymore. And so I basically had given up even before I saw it be completely fractured by the first episode. So, thumbs up, that's cool. We're just going to move on from that. I might as well enjoy it. So, I will. I'll explain to you why I extremely enjoyed the first episode. Because I got Sam Raimi to direct it for the first episode. That's the main reason I enjoyed it. But imagine a perfect mix between the lawless comedy of Evil Dead. Not Evil Dead. Wow, I've been talking about Evil Dead. No, specifically Army of Darkness from the Evil Dead series. There we go. So we've got the comedy of Army of Darkness in the dialogue specifically. And then we have the things that made the original Evil Dead quite good in terms of its horror value and its shock brutality and a lot of things that made it work to begin with, and a lot of things that made it unique with the demonic possession and the Necronomicon and people being possessed kind of left and right. And one thing that kind of is emphasized throughout the show, throughout all the movies, and is then given a complete dedicated episode, pretty much episode 2 in the show, which is that it basically possesses people, but then it can pretend to be normal people. It can, like, if it possesses your mom, it can pretend to be your mother and say things that only your mother would know, and then kind of switch back to the demonic possessed version of your mother now. Pretty creepy stuff, right? That gets that's entirely the premise, the premise of episode 2, which I really appreciate. But episode 1 specifically really sets up the comedy of Army of Darkness, because it then shows you exactly how the Necronomicon gets used to summon all the armies of the dead. Again, to bring back the demons. Get this. Ash is on marijuana while on a date, and he goes, hey girl, check this out. Read from this crazy book that I have. Keep in mind, you can only summon the demons while reading from the Necronomicon. So, of course, the crazy book he pulls out is the Necronomicon. And he goes, hey, read this. Hey, God, it's real funny. Read from this. Ash, you moron. You absolute moron. If you weren't played by Bruce Campbell, I'd be so annoyed. But the moment that scene happened, I just threw my head back and burst out laughing. Because it's the exact same Ash that was in Army of Darkness and Evil Dead 2 and Evil Dead. He hasn't changed a bit, and I love him for that reason. And it just goes to show exactly why I love Ash, because by himself, Ash is funny because in Army of Darkness, he's just like a complete moron who forgets the phrase that he's supposed to say, right? And then he deals with having to fight multiple clones of himself, okay? That's technically him being by himself. In Ash vs. Evil Dead, he has to interact with his co-workers, Pablo and Kelly, and have to go save humanity, and there's some pretty funny dialogue there. And while interacting with other people, Ash is still pretty funny, because he's still a complete moron. There's a flexibility in being a moron, in that you're a moron in all cases, and it's funny no matter who you're with. If you're by yourself, cool, it's funny. If you're with other people, cool, it's funny. And let me tell you, a lot of the jokes in the first 4 episodes I saw made me roll laughing just by how he delivers them, the way he sounds when saying it. I would not be giving anybody else this level of praise if they were not Bruce Campbell. Just keep that in mind every time I bring this up. And I'm glad that I had this happen to me. The fact that I had so much fun watching just the first 4 episodes. Because I had this very strange worry going into Ash vs. Evil Dead. I was extremely worried to myself that it would be kind of a reboot in the sense that it wouldn't follow any of the stylistic choices from the first 3 movies at all. It wouldn't have any of it, and they wouldn't really reference it at all, and it wouldn't feel like the same thing. All of that was completely subverted the moment they introduced the sentient camera. They have this camera be from the perspective of the main monster that can possess people flying around just in the first episode. Sure, it looks stabilized, and it's clearly not done with a 2x4 piece of wood with the camera strapped to it, but I don't care about that. It looks fine, and it moves around at an acceptable speed, and it helps with the pacing, and it's fine. It's still there. They're doing references to it. The fact that it's even brought up, and you still have that great noise as it rumbles along and goes directly into the mouth of some unwilling passerby, that right there alleviated all of my concerns. And I was able to sit back and go, you know what? I think I'm fine. I don't know why I was so worried about them messing it up. Somehow, even though it had been like 20 years after the fact, they managed to capture the spirit of what made me like the series to begin with. Keep in mind, I'm talking about the first 4 episodes. That's really impressive, and it's a very good sign that the rest of the show is almost exactly like that. And it's honestly funny for me to mention it in that fashion, because I would not have believed you if you told me, let's say 2 to 3 years ago, that I would end up falling in love with the Evil Dead series. I would not believe you. When rewatching Evil Dead 2 over the weekend, last weekend more specifically, last Sunday actually, specifically about a week ago, I realized to myself, man, I really like Evil Dead 2. And then I watched Army of Darkness and I was like, wow, I really liked that. And then when I started watching Ash vs. Evil Dead, I was completely reminded to myself, man, I think I just really like the Evil Dead series to begin with. I can't think of a lot of things that I have problems with. I like the way it goes. I like the way it functions. I like the way it flows. I feel like I can recommend it to people who are big fans of horror or really like other things associated with it. And at first, I wouldn't have believed you if you told me that. But taking a step back and watching just parts of Ash vs. Evil Dead, and then seeing what they did with Army of Darkness specifically, I can understand why I like it. It is a horror series, sure, at heart. But it's also an action comedy horror series with adventure elements to it. With that being there, and with really interesting and revolutionary cinematography, and a really good main actor, and really well-written jokes, good writing, and a director who knows what he's doing and has seniority. With that being the core basis and the foundation of the Evil Dead series, I'm not surprised at all that I ended up loving it. I can highly recommend any of the Evil Dead movies to people. The original Evil Dead, not extremely easy to sell, but I mean, if you're into horror movies, you'd like it. Evil Dead 2, I can recommend that to a lot more people because a lot more people, I think, would have more fun with it. Army of Darkness, I can really recommend that one. That one's just a good time, and I will definitely rewatch it probably sometime in the next 3 months. Ash vs. Evil Dead, again, only the first 4 episodes, but they were really good first 4 episodes. Somehow the 2 main sidekicks, Pablo and Kelly, weren't extremely annoying. That's the first for a TV show. You really got to set up the sidekicks to not be annoying, and they did it really well. If anything, I'm actually kind of sad that I can't watch more than the first 4 episodes, because with my schedule being the way it is, I don't know if I could. And that's a shame. It really is a shame. I just really like Evil Dead. I think you've gotten that point by now. And with that being said, it's just such a fun thing to talk about during the month of October leading up to Halloween. If you got time leading up to your Halloween night celebration, if you want to marathon something, Evil Dead is something I strongly recommend watching. You won't regret it. So, with that being said, thank you all for listening in to What to Watch Weekends. What to Watch Wednesdays will be on this Wednesday from 8 to 9 p.m. We'll be talking about the Living Dead series, that being the George A. Romero series, that being Night of the Living Dead up to Day of the Dead. Next Saturday, yes, this upcoming Saturday will be the next episode of What to Watch Weekends, because there is no football broadcast that will be interrupting the show, so please tune into that here on 88.1 The Burg from 8 to 10 p.m. Thank you all for listening in once again, and follow What to Watch Wednesdays on Instagram at What to Watch Wednesdays, all one word, no caps, no spaces. Thank you once again for listening, and I'll be here on Wednesday telling you what to watch. See ya.